Hello, everybody. Adam Parks here with another Receivables Info webinar. Today, I'm here with two of my good friends. I have Traci Oltmans with
Hello.
Verifax, and I have Mr. Mike Colby with DRN Data. How you guys doing today?
Doing well. Thanks so much for having us.
Yep, all is good except for snow in Denver. Other than that, life is.
Ooh. Oh, and I know a lot of us and a lot of the audience is actually there next week for the NCBA conference. So let's hope it's at least somewhat warm for us tropical folks.
Supposed to be in the 70s, so all should be good.
It's not bad.
Fair. Good. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to play in golf there. Now, looking at those that are attending today's webinar, I feel like I know quite a few of you personally, if not all of you. So I'll skip my introduction today. But Traci, could you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got to the seat that you're in today?
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me. I'm excited to be here. I've got a little over 2 decades of sales and customer service experience. I've been with Verifax, a little over 9 years now. Really how I got hired is a really funny story. I came in for the interview. It was a perfect fit. Afterwards, Stephanie and I were talking and just come to find out we had known each other from high school and we went to neighboring high schools. So very small world. She actually bought my prom dress from me my senior year, her junior year. So it was, like I said, very small world. I left the interview. I didn't even make it home. I had gotten a phone call with a job offer. Funny fact, she still has the prom dress. Shortly after I started, she called me in her office and she's like, "Come in, sit down." She's like, "Close your eyes, hold out your hands." So I'm like, "What is going on?" And she puts the prom dress in my hands. So, of course I had to try and squeeze into it. It was hilarious. I really feel like it was a meant to be job offer, and I've loved working for Verifax and working in this industry ever since.
And your role with Verifax is kind of interacting with the customers, understanding their needs, and helping to translate that back into your technology team. Am I kind of understanding that correctly?
Exactly. So, definitely on the sales side and, having lots of conversations with our clients, finding out their goals, their strategies, coming up with solutions for them. I really feel like I have like one of the best jobs here. It's, I get to meet so many great people and I just love it.
Well, and we all get to spend a lot of time together on the road, which is always a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Mike, you've been around for more than a few minutes, and I know pretty much this whole audience has met you, but could you give everybody your quick rundown and kind of your career path?
Thanks, Adam. And my story is not nearly as exciting as Traci's because she was talking about high school. I had my 50-year class reunion in the past already. So you guys know how long I've been doing it. I have a lot of good friends here. I see the names of people on here, a lot of great friends. And I'm going to see some of you here in town very soon. But I started doing this. My introduction to this was via the RTC. And when the banks and savings and loans failed and those consumer assets became available, needed to be liquidated, there wasn't a mechanism in place to do that, similar to the secondary market that had existed for residential loans. I was fortunate. I was at the right place at the right time, got to be a part of creating that market that we now have and buy and sell. And I've worked for a number of different companies throughout my career. Of late, and for the last year, I've had the distinct pleasure and honor of working for DRN Data, a tremendous group of people that have some, and we're going to talk about through the next hour, some of the great data that we're able to bring to the market. And it keeps me in touch. I'm working on a consulting basis as a contractor for DRN, and it's a very good situation for me. So it keeps me in touch with all of you out there and keeps me involved in an industry that I really love.
Well, so both of you guys are coming from organizations that are focused on technology and technology that helps data be applied to the collections and recovery process, which is why I wanted to have both of you on the webinar today. So, I thought we could kick this off by talking a little bit about the past, right? Like what's kind of like the baseline or the foundation for the data waterfalls that are being built, and what does that kind of look like in terms of standard channels? So obviously there's, the credit bureau reports, credit bureau headers, and information and scoring that can be purchased from the credit bureaus. And I feel like that's kind of been the foundation of all of this for a long time. And before I continue forward, I just want to mention to the audience, if you guys have questions as we're going through here, feel free to leave questions in the chat, and we'll be responding to those just as quickly as we can as we go throughout the deck here. But the credit bureaus being kind of that first piece. And, so you have a new account, you bounce it off the credit bureaus, you're getting returned information, and then you're appending that information to your account file, versus a trigger, which is only going to alert me when something has changed. And so I feel like that's kind of a standard in the industry, right? Like you're running a credit bureau, and then if you're going to be holding an account for a period of time, you may be running triggers, but that may also be something that you're leveraging in your strategy based on the time period in which you're going to be working those accounts and the work history of those accounts themselves. Would you agree with that?
I mean, definitely. We're using all of these different data sources. Really, we're using them to build a strong consumer profile to help us create actionable intelligence. So, I mean, all the pieces are key.
Right, pulling all that stuff together and then finding ways to make it actually useful, I think, becomes the next challenge. I think a lot of groups, when it comes to either verifying employment or working through kind of the wage garnishment process, have been using tools like Work Number, which has acquired a lot of third-party verifiers and has a lot of information, but that price point keeps rising. And as the price point rises, it kind of puts us in a position as an industry where we really need to start looking at alternative data sources and how can we get the same or better results without necessarily condensing our margins even further, right? There's enough challenges in terms of the margins that we're able to work with in this industry. And so as prices rise, but our commissions do not, it does create kind of a difficult scenario for organizations.
Yeah.
Now, on the skip tracing side, I think you find a lot of manual social media searches. And Traci, I think this is something that you guys are doing over at Verifax and leveraging kind of that manual interaction with social media to do a little research.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So, I mean, the automation to the manual searches is, it's great, but really we need that manual touch. I mean, automation can only get you so far. It's not going to show you all the, specific consumer nuances, when we're doing those searches. So we're, just really having that human touch to look at all the data and decipher it is key.
Well, the ability to interpret it, right? Because if I'm looking at pictures, the computer is going to struggle to understand the context and what is within that picture, which is why, like, for example, if you're doing a Google search for images, Google always says best practice is to actually write out what's in the picture, in the code on the web page when you're looking at it, so that the computer can actually understand what that image ultimately contains. Now, AI is taking us to a new level, but that's not really, I think, the place that the skip trace or the go find information organizations are at this point. Now, Mike, this also brings up an interesting piece, because I know your data set over at DRN is kind of one of two ways. You can either send it over via an API, or you can go into the manual, process. And I feel like that's kind of along the same lines here, right? Like the actual manual interpretation of what they're able to see.
Well, I don't think there's any question that you have to have the human interaction with that data to actually analyze it and come up with something that in fact is actionable. We're now find ourselves in a situation that I've never seen before, where you're building a consumer profile of what they do, where they go, where they're at certain times of the day. And you do that through various sources. And the standard public records that we do have, we've all used for all these years. But now, and we're also faced with a much more mobile society, much more mobile group that moves around a lot more than than it used to be. And so that makes it a little more challenging to try to locate that. And those public records certainly can benefit us as we go down that path.
I think you're right. I think the consumer has become more nomadic, especially over the past couple of years with a lot more remote working and things of that nature, that it does become a little bit more complex to understand, right? Because especially if we're using license plate scanning and other things where people used to park in front of their job every day, their car might just be in their garage like mine is right now. Like same kind of an idea. But I do think that lends us to identifying new data sets and how can we ultimately use alternative data channels to find new and interesting ways to collect information. And so, Mike, can you tell us a little bit about like license plate scanning and its application to alternative data?
Isn't it kind of great how we kind of just moved ourselves into that so that we could talk about that. What happened at DRN was that the company's been gathering this license plate recognition information and data for a number of years, and then looked at that as data is powerful, data is king. Data really is what we're all looking for to try to find somebody. And then based on the supposition that people are generally not, I was just on a conversation, a demo of the software, and we have found that people are generally not more than about 1,500 feet from their vehicle. So that information has traditionally been used for picking up a particular vehicle, getting it on the truck, repossessing it. That's what this was born out of. However, it was then recognized by the leadership of DRN that the data is extremely valuable and can be used to place the people because they're close to their vehicle and not ever very far away from it, either at a place of employment or at a residence. Now, I'll grant you, it might be a 1,500 unit apartment complex, but at least it gets you close. Or it might be a 38-story office building. But again, it gets you that place of employment, potential, or place of residence. That is information that was being gained or being gathered for another purpose, and that's where it really started. Now it's moved on into, and that's why I'm working for DRN, is to see that data being able to be used in this space, along with you overlay that information on top of all the public information that we're like Verifax is able to provide, that we all have resources for. You overlay that license plate and scan information. Now you can start to prioritize those addresses, those potential places of employment. And for example, your process serving rate might go up because you can see where they're at during the day because they're real close to their car. The other thing that happens is that if you have addresses from these public information sources, and we've had cameras go by that place 30 times in the last 60 days and never seen a vehicle registered to those people, you can eliminate that address. So you can prove it or you can disprove it. So it's just a way it's just another tremendous source of data. That's what it is. The challenge is, how do you make that data actionable? What do you have to do to suck it into your system of record? Something, Adam, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about over the years is getting that data in. And that's right now one of our challenges, and we're working on it. But that's the case with any new set of data, all this social media information that we're now obtaining and able to get. How do we bring that in? How do we suck it into our system so that we can ultimately get in touch with the debtor, get in touch with the consumer, and try and recover on the debt?
Operationalizing the data is always one of the biggest challenges, right? And it's great to have all this information. I tend to look at alternative data as opportunities to identify and then further refine the accuracy of what I think I already know. So as I look at the automation or the operationalizing data sets, I always think about it in terms of the funnel. And that might be because my background is marketing, right? That might just be because my whole world looks at lead and lead generation funnels in that same way. But I think data is very much the same thing, because we start off by trying to understand, what we're getting from, one set of information, our standard sets of information. Then we're using some of this alternative data to further refine what we believe to be true. Right. And that might be, like you said, Mike, either disproving or proving, that a piece of data is accurate or inaccurate. But the more that we can hone in on it, I feel like the circle shrinks around, the right answer, and we get closer and closer and closer to understanding what reality actually looks like.
Well,
Now it's a
it certainly is, and it changes literally daily, and the world changed somewhere around February or March. About 3 years ago. And so the things that I did, the things that I grew up with, don't exist, simply don't exist anymore. But the same challenges do. And, like with license plate scans, there are certain areas that we can't cover. There are certain states that don't allow that. Google faces the same problem with when they put their cameras on the streets. There's certain areas they can't go into or whatever. So those challenges for gathering the data are something that we haven't really faced in the past, and that we have to find a way to deal with. And they present some real operational challenges for all of us trying to deal with this. But the other side of that coin is it's an extremely exciting time, because there's new ways to gather this information almost every day cropping up. So it's a great time, and certainly both of the companies represented in this conversation are a big part of that, and we're enjoying the hell out of it, quite frankly. So.
Well, I think collecting the information and then finding ways to use it, right? Being able to hone in on the data sets, and even taking something like the license plate location information, comparing that against what we're finding on social media, and then comparing that to the next thing and the next thing, right? And so I think when we talk about the social media aspects, one of the things we have to understand is the terms of use from each one of these social media platforms, because you can't just go in there and start data scraping. So you have to find how to live between the lines, so to speak, and find those opportunities to where you can engage with that data. And that's why sometimes manual searching becomes the best solution on certain platforms, while other platforms have services or API tie-ins where you can reach in, grab that data, pull it out, and then start to filter and extract that information in new and interesting ways. Right. But one of the things that you brought up, Mike and Traci, I'm interested to hear what you think about it, is kind of the consumer behaviors, right? And trying to understand what the consumer is doing and how are we going to use that?
Like you said, it's so different now, different than 5 years ago. So there's so many, different opportunities, and consumers are, all over social media. So, we're looking at, who is your consumer? What are they doing? Putting yourself in their shoes. Are they buying cell phones? Is their cell phone data? There's, what is their behavior? How can we use that in pulling all those pieces? Like, we really try and think of it like it's kind of like a puzzle in the skip tracing world. We've gotten all of these, all this data available to our team, and putting together the pieces based on, what that consumer profile is, and how to really, how to look at how they're behaving, in terms of collectability. What are they doing? What is their job history? What is, do they own a house? All of those things help us put together really, putting that puzzle together, so we can in turn give our clients an actionable piece of information to help them, be garnished wages or just to serve. So, it really is a fun time.
Well, I think you're right. It's a lot of building blocks that have to come together. The puzzle's upside down, and now you're going to start putting all of these pieces together, trying to understand what, where, how the consumer is behaving. What are they going to do and trying to kind of predict their location on some level, right? So there's a little bit of guessing and then validating,
Yeah.
right? It's a little bit of the sixth grade the sixth grade scientific process that we all go through, right? Where it's the, set your hypothesis and then try and prove that hypothesis with controls. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. I think you're right on point in terms of the consumer behaviors. And Mike, it ties into what you guys are doing as well, because where is the consumer going to park? Where are they? If they're hitting the same grocery store every week, they probably live within 5 miles of that grocery store. Now I'm able to shrink my circle a little bit more, and I'm getting closer to being able to target.
Well, and that's absolutely right. And we all have a recovery strategy, a recovery methodology as the owners of the debt, and a waterfall that we use of different resources that are available. And when do we use the data? I think one of the challenges that everyone faces is, when is that data best put to use? Do I do it when I first buy the debt? Do I do it when I'm started it down the litigation channel? And I certainly don't have those answers, but it's something that is a challenge that I think everybody faces that's trying to recover debt, is when is the data in fact valid and actionable? And then it changes every day. So you really got to be, you have employ people to analyze the data to determine when it is in fact actionable. And that's something that's never been the case, not in the history that I know of. So yeah, we all have those strategies and methodologies and get new data sets every day. But it goes back to what we were talking about. Then you've got to be able to suck them into your system and make them actionable and make them useful.
So looking at kind of some of these other data sets that we've talked about that are kind of new, marketing and lead data is something that we've started to see become more useful. For example, solar panel leads, right? Because those are generally going to be focused on somebody's residential or commercial address. If you're trying to find, a residential address, there's some opportunities to look at some of this marketing data, especially when it comes to direct mailing data, if the lists are fresh. But that goes back to what you were saying, Mike, about the timing of when this data was collected is going to have a direct driving point to its value proposition. But then also like the Google APIs over a manual search, because unless you're training your staff on how Google really works and they're understanding the differences between a Google ad versus Google My Business listing versus the organic results, you're going to see some different things and actually be able to speed up the efficiencies by leveraging some of those other pieces. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about mining the data here in a couple of minutes. I've also seen the use of consumer transaction data and looking at whether it be either the statements or any other information that can be derived, so that you can say, again, like using the grocery store example, right? They're always hitting the Kroger's in Sterling, Illinois. I bet you they live within 5 to 10 miles of that Kroger's, right? Like they're probably not living in South Florida.
Yeah, I mean,
so
it's definitely, and same thing goes if you're looking for, if they're always at the Kroger, chances are, they're probably employed somewhere nearby too. And, there's so many pieces with that transaction data that's beneficial.
Like if they're always going to the same place, they work or live nearby,
definitely.
right? Like unless you're talking about a hyper rural area, but that can go down another avenue. So, now that we talked about all of these different data sets, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the things that we can do to use this data and improve the value of the data sets that we're looking at. And so one of those pieces is the artificial intelligence and machine learning. But as Mike pointed out earlier, we don't have necessarily the accuracy in the large data set that we once had, right? So if we're looking over 20 years, the behaviors for the first 17 years and the behaviors for the last 3 years are going to be dramatically different. And if those are going to be that dramatically different, I feel like our ability to appropriately train a computer model has shrunk significantly, because now we're only able to use such a small data sample that has a lot of variables baked into it, right? Stimulus funds and other things kind of change the economic landscape and environment and creates these new challenges for training a model and helping that model to understand the consistency of consumer behaviors.
Well, and I think, Adam, you make a very good point, and one that I think everybody has to really pay attention is now we're hyper aware of what's happening, whether it be weather conditions or some other type of emergency or whatever, about where we can use it, when we can use the data. You know, you don't use it because there was a tornado, or a hurricane, or you can't call Adam to collect this week because he's shuttering up his house because hurricane whatever is on the way. So those are things that are new, and all that information is something so it presents a challenge about then monitoring when that data is used, where we get it, and when we use it. And that's something that there isn't a lot of history on yet, and that is evolving literally every day, at least in my view.
Agreed, and that's why we have to stay on top of it. So one of the other things that that I've seen organizations using to refine these data sets significantly is contextual filters, right? It's one thing to say, I want to find, or I'm going to reject anything that says federal, for example. But federal doesn't mean that they work for the federal government, right? Federal government would mean that. So we need context around the language that we're filtering, because they could work for the Denver Federal Savings and Loan Institute or whatever, right? And so the context around the way that we're looking at keywords and searches becomes infinitely important in terms of our ability to hone in or to kind of zero in on the target that we're ultimately looking for. Because if we just take these wide brush strokes and wipe everything off the table because we feel like it's not going to be a fit because of one particular word, but we're not understanding the context in which that word is being used, I think we lose a lot of opportunity, right? We sweep a lot of opportunity into the trash can with the data that we believe is not valuable. And so you spend all this money, time, and energy going to get this particular piece of information or to go collect some data. You start to build this profile around the consumer and then decide to throw that out because there's one criteria that's not being hit. But if we're not looking at that criteria within the context in which it's being spoken, are we just throwing opportunity out the window?
I mean, it all really goes to using the data, using it smart, using, what is important, and, working efficiently. We are always, taking, we're using this quite a bit at Verifax, just, with the context filters in, so everything's efficient. We don't want to miss any opportunities. And really, like you said, if you're weeding out federal, we're missing opportunities for our clients. So, and there does have to be a lot of context built into it, and understanding, it kind of goes to, when we bring in a new client, having those conversations with them, understanding their strategies, their goals, what information's valuable. So that way we can build that program to fit their needs and work those accounts and the data that we have as effectively as possible to yield the most beneficial results for them. And so this plays a huge role, at least, in our process.
I think that makes a lot of sense, which kind of brings us on to the scoring and segmentation. And, as I've spent a lot of time in the math working with a number of different organizations through the years, what I found was that if we're talking about location scoring, right? For example, if we're looking to litigate or we're looking to identify assets, we're trying to hone in on locatability, we'll say, right? Like we'll use the term locatability. And even if I look at a collectability score in some level is measuring the stability of a consumer's lifestyle, for lack of one of the many measurements that come into the credit worthiness discussion. But if we've got a consumer who is collectible, then they're probably have, if there's collectability, there's stability. And then isn't that going to lead us to locatability? Because those people that are moving jobs every 3 weeks are going to be almost impossible to catch up with, right? Because everything is moving so quickly. But those that have a long-term stable job, nurses, teachers, I mean, I could go down a massive list of those with that have a higher probability of being in the same position for an extended period of time. I think that adds a lot to it. But it does also require us to do some tweaking and some playing with how we're actually managing that data and information, right? Once we're taking in these scores, how are we weighting various scores, and what is that doing to kind of prove our point?
Well, and I think, Adam, that the old adage that you collect 85% of your money from 12 or 15% of any given population of a portfolio you purchase or whatever. So the goal in that scoring and that segmentation is to prioritize and identify that which is going to be most collectible, and you're going to be able to get your money back on those particular accounts. So it becomes with a mobile as our society has become and continued on, it becomes a real challenge to identify those using the data sets that you have. And so it's great to have all the data, but it then again becomes a real challenge about how to prioritize and use that data to determine the collectability, because there are going to be some of the accounts that you identified as changing jobs every 3 weeks that simply aren't going to pay you. So you don't want to spend any time or energy on those accounts as you build your recovery model. And you have to be willing to, I know in days gone by for me, the recovery model was the recovery model was the recovery model. Don't mess with the recovery model. Well, and that's why we can only pay X number for this particular portfolio, because we're only going to collect X number of dollars. Well, that's gone, that's out the window, because now we have the data available, a lot of new data every day almost, and that we have to build that into the methodology, the recovery model that we're going to use to try to collect on those accounts, using those things you were talking about in collectability, stability, and I can't remember the other ability that you used, but
locatability.
I should know that one, since that's what locatability is. That one should be my first one. But that scoring and segmentation is not just at the beginning of the purchase. It's almost every night when you build the queues for your collectors, or every day, whatever that happens to be. And that becomes a challenge that we've not faced in this industry, in my view, ever before. There's never been a time like this.
Well, going back to what you were saying about the, kind of scoring and segmentation piece, is that, we don't want to waste money buying data and going after accounts that are never going to collect. So if we're able to create some scoring and segmentation up front, we're able to put ourselves in a position to where we can eliminate or remove some accounts from the workflow to ensure that we optimize the efficiency of how we're spending our money to acquire data, right? Very little of the data that we're talking about today is free, right? So there's some cost. It may not be expensive, but there's always some cost associated with collecting or retrieving data and information. And as we go through that process, now what, right? Like we're bringing this data in. Do we want to continue to spend on the 85% of the accounts that are never going to make a payment, right? That it's never going to work. Now, as we get more into the judgment span of things, right? And we're talking more about post-judgment, and now we're trying to execute, I would say at this point, knowing, especially some of the people that are kind of watching us today, that they're not sending an account out for litigation unless that account has already been determined to have the right value attributes. audience, right? They've already determined there's some value there, and now they're leveraging alternative data sources to go and actually be able to execute on the collection of those accounts. So we don't want to filter away too much, knowing how much filtering has been done leading that data set or leading that account into our world to begin with, right? And so one of the things that I always like to look at as we talk about scoring and segmentation is the continual process of leveraging the scientific method and looking at our control, creating a control group, creating a variable group, applying alternative data to that variable group, and then measuring the results, right? Just like a carpenter, you got to measure twice and cut once. But the more that we can measure this material, like the more that we can measure the results of what we're doing, ultimately, the more we can refine, we can twist. Because I look at this, and we talked about the funnel, but I look at each layer of the funnel as you go down has different levers that you can pull, right? And that's how much data do you want to bring into the process? What kind of geo restrictions do you want to put into place, right? But there's all these different kinds of restrictions and management pieces that can allow us to shrink the circle and get closer and closer to our ultimate target. But if we're not testing that against a control group, there's too many variables from portfolio to portfolio to say, just because I bought this from this portfolio and this portfolio from the same creditor does not make them equal, right? There's still going to be variables on a month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter, whatever your time frame is basis. And so you still have to go through that scientific process of creating a control and a variable group to enable accuracy and optimization.
I mean, I 100% agree. I mean, it's really an evolving process that never stops. I mean, you're never letting these accounts rest. You're always improving. So leveraging the scoring to improve your results, really just improving your current process, never letting something go stale, or just sitting there because it was, one outcome 6 months ago. So, I mean, it's just, we're always testing. We're always, kind of using that scientific method and testing and improving, to really give you something, to give our customers something actionable. And so, it's always ongoing.
Well, in creating some strategies from those results, right? So if we're going to go through the process of testing that data, what are we learning from it? And sometimes it's about what we learned not to do, and it's what we learned to do. And so I think that becomes a little bit more of a kind of a pointed direction over time when we can really start to hone in further. We run a test, we look at that test, and then we can say, okay, did this make sense? Did we achieve the results that we were looking for? And then maybe even looking at alternatives from it. And so this next point here, I think, is actually really interesting. And knowing both of your organizations as well as I do, I kind of have a pointed question for each one of you in terms of finding new products in the existing data. And so, Traci, from your perspective, one of the things that I saw with Verifax, right, as you guys have gone through the process of evolving your product mix or your product matrix, is that you found the opportunity to be able to sell results codes, because like your primary business is selling a verified POE, right? Like that's the core, and you do residential and other things. But from that core, you're able to say now that, no, this one was not a hit, but why, right? So now you're able to communicate that this person was incarcerated or whatever the case may be. How has that come across to your clients?
Well, I mean, this is something actually that we've been doing forever, but as we're working, we're a manual process. We're combing through those accounts. Ultimately, we know so much about that file makeup that, we're working. We know we have a resolution on every single account we're touching. So that can be really valuable. And it kind of ties back to the having conversations with your client. What is their goals? What is their strategies? Knowing what information is valuable. It's not just that full-time POE. There is some value in knowing, is this person self-employed? Are they part-time? Are they deceased? Are they retired? Could you make, you have a really strong lead. All points are that this person is employed. We just couldn't fully verify that. There's a lot of value in knowing your account makeup that isn't just a full-time employee. So we do have those resolution options at the end of a placement that we'd have a conversation with our clients and see what is valuable. And those are just ongoing conversations. And it's a lot of very cool data that helps our clients put those accounts down different paths, not just, for garnishment, but it gives them some resolution. And like I said, we know so much about that account makeup, and we definitely want to share that.
Well, it gives the client an opportunity to move things down different channels. But the way I look at what you guys have kind of put together with the results or resolution codes is similar to, I'm going to use a really old example and say John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil, right? Kerosene was a byproduct of the oil refinery process, and he found ways to market and bring that into the marketplace. So, what you're ultimately bringing into the market is a byproduct of the manual labor that you've already put into these accounts. And there is a value, not just on, I had kind of a success in a locate or a verification of employment, but there's also some level of success in identifying that this person is incarcerated, is full-time, is part-time, is self-employed, or whatever. That may not work for that particular jurisdiction's garnishment, but understanding that that's not an angle that they're going to be able to work, and you verified that that is the case, I think is incredibly important, and is leveraging existing data in a new way, right? You're building a new product out of data that you already
were
had.
sitting on it. I mean, it's definitely a very cool product, and being able to share that with our clients too brings so much value. And and everyone's strategy changes too, so that's why we're just always going to have those ongoing conversations and help our clients to give them pieces that work for them.
So, Mike, from your perspective, DRN was in the repossession business, right? Find the car, hook the car, sell the car. Like, that was their whole thing. And then DRN Data finds this whole new avenue and all these new uses for that existing data. What was that process like for you?
Well, I think it was just looking at that information and saying, wow, we have all this data. What does this data tell us? Well, the first view was, we know where the car is, so yeah, we can hook it up and we can go get it. But wait a minute, we also know where those people are, because they weren't that far away. They were the ones screaming at the repo agent that you can't take my car. So now you knew where they were. And then you were able to find other registered vehicles that individual had, or somebody related to that individual had. So you started gathering up this data, and the light bulb went on and just said, well, we're talking to people that are constantly saying, we can't find our consumer. We can't find and talk to the debtor. And I said, well, wait a minute. They were right next to that car while it was going on the truck, screaming their head off, whatever, right? So it was just like a light bulb went on and said, okay, that data exists. There were a number of us that were talking to those people at DRN and said, that's what you have. That data is invaluable. And it's taken a while to figure out how to get it into a form and format that it can be usable and actionable and really help you. But, as the process started from repossession, then the light went on and said, oh, well, wait, we can also use it. Law enforcement would love to have this information. Where is that person? So that's another avenue they went down. DRN's gone down with the data. There's 7 or 8 other verticals that this data all centers around that license plate scan about where they are. And that's one of the challenges I faced. Everybody thinks of DRN and thinks of anybody that's involved in just auto business. It only applies to automobile loans. Not the case. It's the asset class as it was originated absolutely does not matter. It has no bearing on it. It is finding the individual, finding the consumer or set of consumers that are responsible for paying back the debt. So then I really love the conversations when we sit down with the sales team to say, where else can we use the data? Well, we've already mentioned, but I'm going to do it again, is process servers. The success rate of process servers can increase if you know real time that where they're at. And if you talk to anybody that owns debt and that takes it down that litigation path, that they're going to tell you that a large expense is getting the process server and getting those success rates up. And this data helps. And then you say, well, wait a second. And somebody from my background that bought and sold portfolios for as long as I did, you say, what if you analyzed the data, the potential portfolio that you're looking to buy? What if you analyzed it with this information before you ever bought it? Before you ever said, I'll pay X for it, to help you determine that path. What path are you going to take this particular account, what path are you going to take it down based on some of the information now that you can use the statistical analysis that we've been able to do based on I don't know, the numbers are really, in terms of how many scans we do a month, are astronomical, but so now you say you can use it before you ever buy it. Then you can use it once a quarter while you own it. And then, and one of the things, Adam, that I think happened is as we talk about the data and the need for all this data that we're talking about, is when the resale market went away, when that avenue of revenue for debt owners went away, then you had to be more efficient. You had to be better at
over the whole life cycle.
Exactly. So then this data that we're talking about became that much more important. That had, in my view, a tremendous impact on what we've been talking about for the last, according to my clock, 49 minutes. Data and using that data and how to use it efficiently and finding these sources, because a big revenue. I mean, I know that in the model, in the recovery model, when you showed it to the purchasing committee, you said, and we'll get 14% when we resell it, or we'll get 22% when we resell it. That went away. That's a big chunk. So that data you need to help you increase, as you said, the margins have been squeezed.
Well, as we talk about contextual filtering here, one of the things that I found interesting is I was kind of looking at the DRN alternative product here, which was kind of understanding you guys are you've got your information, then you're supplementing your information with additional public records, and those public records are giving us a best address. So if I remember logging into the portal and kind of going through on the search, I'll have like a couple of different addresses that are possibles, but then I'm going to have like the heart, which is like the most likely, right? And so for me, that's an example of context filtering, because you're leveraging multiple pieces of data to refine it and say, these 4 are possible addresses, but this one right here, this is where I'm pretty sure they're at. But that, to me, it's taking the context of all of the information that you've collected through public records, comparing that and amending or appending that to the data set that you already had, and then kind of leveraging that. But since we're running a little low on time, because I think we're just having fun today, I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about the state of the industry here as well, and then talk a little bit about technology if we still have time. So for those of you that are watching, if you have any questions, you can drop those in. Now would be a great time. We're just going to continue chatting here, probably because I'm a data nerd, but I think when we talk about fragmentation, right, the state of the industry right now, there's a lot of fragmented data sets. And I think more organizations like Verifax, like DRN, are finding ways to consolidate information and provide actionable intelligence from that information, right? But look at, just in what we were just talking about, Mike, we got the public records, we got the DRN data, then we got, some of the things that Verifax is doing, and the manual work that goes in behind that to verify it, because I think when I first started looking at some of the organizations in the space, and trying to understand the data, I always looked at Verifax as kind of like a manual process, like a manual shop. But I think what I learned over time is that, an organization like Verifax is really a technology company that's focused on data that's verified by people. And I think as the organization has continued pulling all of this new information and data together, it becomes that filtration, right? Whether it be through contextual filters, artificial intelligence, or whatever. But we are ultimately kind of paring down that information. We're closing the scope on our target, so to speak, and finding new ways to leverage that information. But the fragmentation of all of this data historically has been a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead. Sorry, Mike.
No, that's absolutely correct. And it's a challenge daily. It's great to have the data. What in the heck am I going to do with it? How can I be efficient with it?
Yeah.
How can you actually use it? And then I think the data sets have become more expensive.
Yeah.
I mean,
right?
And we're always like looking at the data and using it effectively. And like we know how many minutes, how much it costs for every minute of labor. I mean, labor and data go hand in hand. And looking at, this piece of data versus this data cost how much for us to verify. If we can use it effectively and even reduce, a few minutes of work on an account, I mean, that's a huge savings that just lets us work more, effectively. And with all the price increases, I mean, that's really key. If you can reduce labor time, it's essential. So just knowing the data and how to use it and what pieces are working, and it's, ever changing, always testing, just to really make it more efficient. And, you stay within those cost margins. You have to. You don't want to increase.
Well, with thin margins, you really don't have a choice. But I think our next point here about the exploration of new sources is essential, and it's why there's so many people on the webinar today, right? Because everybody's looking at where can I find new information to improve my processes? Where can I find new opportunities within the margins that I have to work within, right? Because like you said, down to the second how much labor is going to cost and how much labor is ultimately you are willing to apply to an individual account based on what that account is ultimately worth to an organization. And I think that's a tough balance, right? It's hard to find the sweet spot, so to speak. But I do believe that there is a sweet spot that can be hit, and we're always kind of looking towards that. But that also ties into kind of looking for new efficiencies. With our final 5 minutes here, I think talking about technology is kind of king here, right? Proprietary is king. Both of you guys I know are operating on proprietary platforms. I think when it comes to debt buyers, agencies, law firms, most of them are working on some sort of a pre-existing system, right? There's the Latitudes of the world and all of these systems of record that are ultimately being managed. But those are built for collections and recovery. Those are not built to do what you guys are doing. And so finding those interesting ways to take the data sets that you're creating and the value proposition within those large data sets and flowing those or being able to push those into an operationalized system like a Latitude by Genesis that the debt buyer is ultimately going to be using to manage their accounts, I think is king, right? But that's where the flexibility and the technology comes in.
Well, I don't think there's any question about that. You have to. It's great that you now know that car is there at this time, but what am I going to do with that? And I need to do it in a hurry because it's going to move.
Data ages, right? And the value of data drops over time. So a piece of, like, if I know something for sure right now, Adam Parks is sitting in Port St. Lucie, Florida, it's valuable today, but that may not be valuable tomorrow. So how quickly can you start to move some of that information out in different ways and make it useful, because the time matters, right? And I hate to go back to the same thing I say all the time when it comes to evaluating a business, but what matters? The cash flow, the timing of the cash flow, the risk associated with that cash flow. The timing of the data is very important. Like, that's one of those key attributes that is going to drive the value proposition of the information that you have at hand. Now, Let me ask you this, Traci. When it comes to the technology of your clients, I'm assuming not everybody's, asking for everything in exactly the same format. I'm assuming there's a whole bunch of
There's,
customization to be able to get the data out
yeah,
to
oh
them.
yeah, definitely lots of customization. And we're a small company. We have a great IT team. We're always I'm getting data in and out, and everyone has specific automations. And we can have the best information in the world, but if it's not easy for them to ingest, it's not going to be helpful. So we are always open to customizing and making the transfers easy for our clients. We want to be a good partner to give, and just make it. I mean, we always say we want to make it as easy as possible. I mean, customizations we do definitely a lot of.
I think for any data company, right? And I think both of you guys could fall into this, into this category, but for any data organization, getting the data in and getting the data out always tends to be the largest hurdle by which to secure a new client. And so having that flexibility in the way in which you ingest and export data from your own systems is an integral part of the value proposition that you can provide to an end user client. It's not easy by any stretch of the imagination. It's definitely something that, it is always challenging because that everybody's got their own way of doing it. Like you said, automated FTP drops. They may want to go through a live interface and do things manually. Every organization based on their size, their IT resources, right? So it doesn't always come down to what is Verifax or what is DRN capable of, but what is the client capable of and what kind of IT resources are they going to be able to apply to the process to make something work. So I find it to be very interesting to see how some of these things can come together over time. But I believe that is all the time we have for today. We are coming up on the 1 o'clock Eastern time block. So I wanted to say thank you to both of you just quickly for coming on and having a chat with me today. I always enjoy the opportunity to hang out with you guys. We'll see you at NCBA in Denver next week. But thank you guys for so much for coming on.
Absolute pleasure, Adam. Thank you so much. I appreciate everybody that sat in and listened to this. It was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll see you again soon.
Bye.